Okay. So we did our project on the US Treasury yield spreads and unemployment forecasting. And we did this by analyzing the Treasury yield spreads to forecast US unemployment trends. And the team consists of me, Mariah Calloway, and
Hi, I'm Shivansh Verma.
yes. And on the slide, you will see our emails and both for our web pages. Okay. So our objective was to use historical U.S. Treasury yield spreads from the time frames of 1990 to 2023, and we used these to predict unemployment trends. We combined these yield rates with Federal Reserve unemployment data to get our full data set. The goal is to identify economic indicators that can help forecast labor market conditions. Our target audience were Federal Reserve, businesses, governments, or anyone else that can um, use unemployment data for whatever purposes they may have. The data models that we used was the regression-based forecasting model, and the overall design was a predictive system to use historical unemployment data to forecast future unemployment rates. The primary data set were the U.S. Treasury par yield curve rates from the time frame of 1990 to 2023. And we got these from the U.S. Department of the Treasury website. And they includes various yields. And then the second data set that we used was the U.S. unemployment rate. And we got this from the Federal Reserve Economic Data website. And this data set represents monthly unemployment percentages. To prepare the data, we merged the two data sets into one, and we did this using the date field. We removed duplicate data, and we also handled missing values. And doing all of this helped us have a clean data set in order to do our visualizations and our regression analysis. Um, One visualization that we did was a time series plots. So as you can see, we used the unemployment and treasury yield trends, and this is all plotted on the graph, and you can see how it goes up and down. And this is typically because of different recessions and recoveries over time. And then we also did a correlation heat map, which shows the relationships between the variables. Um, so you can see where it's red that that's highly correlated, and then where it's blue, it's not correlated as much. Um, so you can see that the treasury maturities showed strong positive correlations with one another, which is where you'll see all the red dots or boxes. And then the other boxes were the U rate, the unemployment rate, um, is blue. And then the 10 to 2 year spread is also, there's a lot of blue in those two. Those just show where it's not strongly correlated with the yield rates. And then another visualization that we did was to show the treasury yield changes over time. And typically you can see that it trends downwards majority of this time frame, just showing that long term that the yield rate has gone down since 1990. And then it did spike up in the later years during 2024.
Okay, so I'll be explaining the regression model. Now that we have explored our data, let's walk through like how we build our predictive model and our regression model. So we use the multivariate ordinary least square regression (OLS) as our core approach. The central question is, can Treasury yields spread or combine with the recent unemployment history, and also tell us where the unemployment is heading. Our model uses 11 predictors in total. The auto regression lags the rate at once at 3 and at 6 months back. Because of unemployment is highly persistent from month to month, and the 4 year yield levels of the one year, 2 year, 5 year, and 10 year, and basically up to 30. The treasury rates, the 10 year minus the 2 year spread, the classic yield curve regression signals a 3 year yield data, which terms to capture a rate of change of momentum, and all features we standardize before fitting make the coefficient directly comparable. Can we go to the next slide? So our regression model results. So what did the model actually produce? The results can tell an interesting two-part story. Our held out our held out test set spanning through from 2020 to 2023 represents the model achieved the R square of 0.5669 and RMSE of 1.54 percentage points. That might sound modest at first glance, but that's the number, mostly driven by single event. And the COVID-19 shock in April of 2020, when the unemployment shot to 14.7% in a single month. We'll unpack that in just a moment, but the OLS training summary just tells us a stronger story where the fit of our data from 2000 to 2009 pre-COVID training data achieves R square of 0.99, explaining a 99.4% invariance unemployment across the normal economic conditions. Our one specially encouraging this diagnostics, the Durbin-Watson statistic, is 2.243, essentially the right ideal value of the meaning residential correlations in minimum of on the training set. This is better than the original paper than estimated in the model. Next slide. Actual versus predicted run rate. Looking at the actual versus unpredicted chart, you can see the model tracks unemployment movements tightly through most of the test period. The main character in the room and the main driver of the 1.54 RMSE is during April of 2020, as you can see in the chart, spiked was caused by a sudden government-mandated economic shutdown, something with no historical parallel in the data training data. No regression model built on yield unemployment relationships from 2000 to 2019 could have anticipated that. And yet the model is still partially capture elevated risk. It predicted it from a 9.1% to not a 4%. That tells us why the yield signals were already flashing warning signs heading into 2020. What's equally important is that what happens after the model reconverges with reality by mid 2021, as you can see in the chart. Once the structural shock passes and the auto-regression dynamics reassert themselves, prediction accuracy snaps back tightly. That converges into a strong validation of our model score design. Next. Next. Slide 13. So this is our 12-month scenario forecast that we have predicted. This brings us to a forward-facing looking piece, the 12-month scenario forecast running from our January to December of 2025. The model uses a recursive approach where each month's predicted unemployment feeds back to the next month's lag input. Where we build three scenarios on a baseline with yields unchanged, a cut scenario where short-term rates fall from 50 points over the year, and a rate hike scenario where they rise by 50 basis points. The scenario spreads at 12 months, the gap between the rate cut and the rate hike endpoints. That is narrow spread reflects something fundamental about the unemployment dynamics. It is highly inertial. The biggest predictor of next month's rate is notably the direction is exactly right. The rate hikes push employment lower through the demand cooling, while the cut allows it to drift slightly higher. Next. In this slide, we talk about project impact and application. Who benefits from this model in practice? There are four primary audiences: the Federal Reserve and the FOMC, monitoring the yield curve signals against the unemployment mandate over a 6 to 18 month horizon. Second are the corporate HRs and finance teams, workforce planning, when to hire, when to pause, and such other factors. Third would be the federal and state governments, basically planning all their physical planning, especially the unemployment insurance and reserve management. And fourthly, being the investors using the scenario spread as a risk of on and risk off signal for portfolio positioning. The broader the point is that the transparent, reproducible OLS model built entirely on publicly available Fed data can generate directionally correct and economically meaningful forecasts. Next. So what's the future work? We are satisfied with what this model achieves, but we are clear-eyed about where it can go further. Four main directions being first being our non-linear models, grading boosting such as the XG boost to capture the regime-dependent relationships that OLS misses, especially at the zero lower bound. Second being the time varying coefficients, Kalman filter or rolling regression to let the yield employment relationship evolve over the time rather than just being fixed across just 25 years. Third being the walk around cross validation, replacing the single 80-20 split with the 12 or more rolling windows for more robust accuracy estimates. And fourthly being the uncertainty quantification, basically a bootstrap confidence intervals or the regression to produce prediction bands are essential when the cost over or versus the under forecasting is asymmetrical. Next. So, in conclusion, to wrap this up, this project was set out to answer whether the Treasury yield spreads can help forecast unemployment. The answer is yes, with important nuance. The OLS model achieves the training error square or the Watson of 2.243, confirming a strong fit and near zero residual correlation under the normal economic conditions. The test of the RMSC is largely attributable to 1 month of, let's say, an example, April 2020, an unprecedented shock that no yield-based model trained on historical data could anticipate. But the scenario forecast confirms the yield signals work in a correct direction based on a 50 basis point rate hike versus the cut produces in unemployment by year by the end of 2025. Modest though directionally being meaningful and economically consistent. Treasury yield spread don't predict the future perfectly, but combining the regression and structure of employment, they make the forecast meaningfully better than the naive of the exploration all over. Thank you so much.